people killed my mother!
How dare you kill my father! You're dead!
I will one day obliterate Britannia!
Vengeance is one of the many core themes that Kogias and Vinland Saga share, as it's the primary motivator behind both Lelouch and Thorfinn's actions. That is why in today's video, I'm going to compare their tales of vengeance. Through analyzing each part, which includes why they went on this path, their approach, and the results, I will determine which one was better. Now besides vengeance, Thorfinn and Lelouch also attempted to create a better world. I will briefly discuss this later on in the video during the results section. Once Vinland Saga ends, which will be a very sad day, I will then compare those plans, much like my video on Lelouch versus Eren. But that is not this day, so let's sail the seas and pilot our nightmare frames to find out whose quest for revenge was better. Let's start with Lelouch's why. When he was 10 years old, Charles, Marion, C2, and V2 were working together on the Ragnarok Connection, a complex plan to unite the souls of the dead and the living into one collective consciousness. It would end up slaying God, creating a world without lies. There's more to it, but that's another story for another time. During this, V2 wrongly assumed that Marion was leading his brother Charles astray, so naturally he killed Marion, then covered it up, making it seem like the work of terrorists. This also included crippling Nunnally, Lelouch's sister, and placing her in Marion's arms. Lelouch arrived too late and only observed the aftermath, his mother in a bloody mess with his traumatized sister in her arms. Following her death, Lelouch became frustrated with Charles' apathy for the whole situation. This prompted Lelouch to seek an audience with him. The conversation doesn't go well, with Charles losing his patience, exiling him and Nunnally to Japan as bargaining chips. Britannia invaded Japan sometime after this. Much ensued, which included Japan losing the war and Suzaku Kudarugi, Lelouch's childhood friend, killing his father, Genbu Kudarugi, who was also the Prime Minister of Japan. During Genbu's funeral, Lelouch declared to Suzaku,
I will one day obliterate Britannia!
The story then picks up 7 years later. Lelouch is now in high school, lives with Nunnally at Ashford Academy, with his family assuming they died during the war. Under the protection of the Ashford family, with a new identity as Lamperouge, Lelouch can begin to achieve his 3 goals: destroy Britannia, get revenge for his mother, and create a gentler world for Nunnally. Now let's travel even further back to 1002 AD Iceland to discuss why and who Thorfinn sought revenge against. At age 6, Thorfinn lived a simple life with his proud father Thors, his loving mother Helga, and his badass sister Ylva, named after Thor's late mother. Thors was actually a deserter from the young Vikings, where he fled with Helga 16 years ago and settled in Iceland. But Thors seemed secretive about it and never told Thorfinn. Instead, Thorfinn only knew of the outside world from Leif's stories. Much of it was a mix of reality, myth, and fantasy. He was a lively boy who sought adventure, wanting to explore the world and even fight on the battlefield. So young, so naive. He would get his chance because Floki arrived in Iceland accompanied by the young Vikings, the same young Vikings that Thors abandoned so many years ago. He alongside them made their presence known. Floki demanded that Thors help them fight in an upcoming battle, or well, you get the idea. Thors' past had finally caught up to him. He agreed to fight alongside Floki, bringing along several eager and naive villagers. They set out in 2 ships, one piloted by Leif and his crew, and the other by Thors and the villagers. In secret, Thors planned to protect the villagers by leaving them at one of their stops on their way to the battlefield, thus ensuring he'd be the only one to join the battle. But two unexpected things occurred. One, Thorfinn snuck on board his ship, and two, Floki hired Askeladd and his crew to kill Thors. Thors was not initially happy to see Thorfinn on the ship and gave him quite a funny punishment, but still, it was nice for him to be there. Before this, Thors imparted his most important lesson to Thorfinn.
You have no enemies. No one does. There are no enemies. No one out there deserves to be hurt. No one at all.
There's also this part as well after Thors' duel against Askeladd.
I believe that a true warrior does not need a sword.
Both lessons would later influence Thorfinn's future actions and his understanding of the world. Then we have Askeladd, who led a group of pirates. Before Thors could arrive at their scheduled stop, Askeladd's crew ambushed them. The pirates attempted to capture the villagers, but Thor defeated half of them without using lethal force. This prompted Thor to challenge Askeladd to a duel that would determine the fate of his crew. If Thors wins, they are free to go. If he loses, then Askeladd's men are free to do what they want. At first, it went well, with Thors appearing to be the victor. But these are pirates after all, so of course they didn't honor the conditions of the duel. They instead captured Thorfinn to force Thor's hand. Thors then offers his life, so Askeladd will then honor the agreement of the duel, since he technically declared him the victor before this. Askeladd's men killed Thors in front of Thorfinn. Devastated by this, he became enraged with the desire to kill Askeladd. That cute naive boy died this day. He hid in his father's ship one more time as Askeladd's men took it away. Eventually, his men discovered Thorfinn but decided to spare him. Askeladd figured the boy wouldn't live long anyways. Thorfinn would end up following Askeladd to their next stop and thus began his quest to avenge his father. The stage is set, so now let's discuss each character's path towards vengeance, starting with Lelouch. Lelouch was working towards three main goals: destroy Britannia, create a gentler world for Nunnally, and avenge his mother's death. Due to having three goals, much of Lelouch's actions were split between pursuing each one. He even had conversations with C2 on which goal was the highest priority. Originally, they were all equal, but eventually, Nunnally became the #1 priority. But even then, there was still overlap in his actions. To avenge his mother, Lelouch would have to confront his father Charles. Since Charles is the Emperor of Britannia, this means Lelouch will have to fight Britannia, which coincided with his goal to destroy the nation. And there are other examples like this, so keep that in mind as I go through Lelouch's steps to avenge his mother. During his conversation with C2 during the Black Rebellion, he told her that if he takes over the government bureau while declaring their independence, meaning Japan's, then Charles will have to face him. Since Lelouch has a Gias power, thanks to C2, he can use it on his father to learn the truth. So everything that happened in season 1 prior to this, which included creating the Black Knights, the Battle of Narita, the Battle of Port Yokozuka, and the Black Rebellion, were all meant for this one goal. I do wonder how Lelouch intended to fight Charles if he had agreed to the SAS or accomplished his other goals, but that's another topic for another time. Lelouch also worked on other methods to learn the truth behind his mother's death. He used Gias on Clovis and tirelessly worked to capture Cornelia to do the same. One of his theories behind his mother's death was her status as a commoner. He figured the nobles didn't like that and thus arranged the cover-up, so obviously going after his family members would make sense. Unfortunately, Clovis told him that Cornelia and Schneisel would know. Cornelia revealed that she was protecting Marion on that dreadful day, but Marion inexplicably told her to stop. Cornelia also stated that Schneisel transported the body. Oddly enough, Lelouch never attempted to ask Schneisel what happened despite this new development. Although not directly related, in Code Geass Lost Stories, Mario told Lelouch that Schneisel was arriving in Area 11. Lelouch then thinks about getting Schneisel through Suzaku because of Clovis's intel. So I guess with this new information we learned that Lelouch was going after Schneisel, but simply didn't have the chance to do so. This is most likely due to how things worked out, because by the time Lelouch got to Schneisel, he had already learned the truth. Anyways, Lelouch's first Black Rebellion failed with his capture alongside the Black Knight leaders, excluding Kaguya, Rakshata, and Detard. Charles, with V2's help, captured Nunnally and used his Geass power and rewrote Lelouch's memories. R2 began with C2 rescuing Lelouch while restoring his memories. Then he regained the Black Knights, which allowed him to pick up where he left off. He also redeclared the United States of Japan, fled to Horai Island with the Black Knights, and helped Shinkai overthrow the Chinese Federation government. The secret motivation for going to the Chinese Federation was to find the Geass Order. This would again allow him to face his father and his uncle V2, someone he had just learned about in this season. Following the Geass Order massacre, Lelouch would have two confrontations with his father. The first in turn 15, immediately after destroying the Geass Order, and turn 21 while in C's world to prevent the Ragnarok connection. Between these events, the leaders of many nations formed the UFN with the Black Knights as their official military in turn 16. The Battle of Tokyo 2 started in turn 17, which led to the climax in turn 18, where Suzaku fired the Flail Warhead. Then the Black Knights betrayed Lelouch in turn 19 for completely logical reasons.
But, not really though.
And after Rollo saved him from that betrayal, he found the resolve to move past his sister's death to finish his fight against his father. Now let's talk about Thorfinn. His plan is much simpler than Lelouch's for several reasons. He's only seeking vengeance against a single man, not an entire country. Thorfinn doesn't have to find Askeladd since he traveled with him. Why Askeladd killed his father is irrelevant to Thorfinn, and Askeladd supported Thorfinn's plan with some conditions that I'll touch on in a moment. Because of these conditions, he doesn't go through a crazy elaborate process. Thorfinn instead only focused on getting stronger while working with Askeladd's men. He traveled with this group for over 10 years. In exchange for his help on various missions, Askeladd would reward him with a duel. This is all Thorfinn lived for, so he went through great lengths to earn these challenges. This included taking the head of the commander during the battle in France, fighting Thorkel several times, and protecting Prince Canute. Thorfinn hoped to defeat Askeladd in these duels and avenge his father. There were other things at play during this time, like King Sweyn's plan to kill Prince Canute, Askeladd's Welsh lineage, and the war between Denmark and England. But these things aren't directly related to his quest of vengeance, so I won't elaborate further on them. And don't worry, I will discuss the Baltic War arc later on, as I am aware how that arc played a role in Thorfinn's plan to avenge his father. So now that you understand their plans, the next question is, well, what happened? Did either character get their revenge? In the proper way of utilizing subverting the audience expectations, the answer is no. Well, in the traditional sense. Starting with Lelouch, who assisted Cornelia and Charles in killing V2, Marianne's murderer. The problem was, Lelouch didn't know this at the time, since this happened in turn 14 and Charles told Lelouch the truth in turn 21. What's even more ironic is that Cornelia was in the opposite situation. She helped kill V2, thinking it would avenge Yuffie's death, despite the fact that V2 had no involvement in that matter. When it came to Charles, as I mentioned, he faced him twice. He failed to kill him the first time using his Geass, since Charles prior to this took V2's code. This resulted in Charles pulling a fake out death and Lelouch had to escape C's world with C2 while trapping Charles inside. In the second confrontation, things only became more complicated because Lelouch reunited with his mother in C's world and learned the truth. After learning the nature of his parents' plan, he rejected both of them. He was able to stop the Ragnarok connection, resulting in C's world absorbing both of his parents. So, in an ironic twist, he ended up finishing off his mother as opposed to avenging her. Well, sort of. Again, it's complicated. What isn't is the aftermath, the Zero Requiem. Lelouch, while in C's world, realized that humanity wanted a future and worked with Suzaku to make it happen. When it comes to Thorfinn, there are two parts to his quest for vengeance, much like how Lelouch had two encounters with Charles. Each part concerns one of the two men responsible for Thor's death, Askeladd and Floki. The first part is what I discussed already, where he traveled with Askeladd's men. Unfortunately, in part 1, someone else killed Askeladd, Canute. You see, Askeladd killed King Sweyn to honor his promise to protect Canute and the people of Wales. He then pretended to go berserk, so Canute had to put him down. That allowed Canute to become king. Thorfinn arrived too late and could only observe the aftermath. Unlike Lelouch, who had several goals and lived for Nunnally, Thorfinn solely lived to kill Askeladd. Once this was taken away, he had nothing left. This was one of the reasons why his death broke Thorfinn. Askeladd before his death got to Thorfinn one more time by asking him what he intended to do after this. Thorfinn never considered this, which amused Askeladd. In his final moments, Askeladd imparted wisdom to Thorfinn, much like Thors did before. During this, Thorfinn couldn't control his temper, pleading for Askeladd to not die. Thorfinn seemed to have conflicting views on Askeladd. At one end, he hated him for killing his father. At the same time, he saw him as his father, or a father figure. This is not only one of the best scenes in Vinland Saga, but in anime period. Now, as I said, this is the first of two parts. A lot happens in between parts 1 and 2, and within part 2 itself. So I'm going to quickly go over everything that happened in season 2 and chapters 102 to 160 as it relates to Thorfinn's quest for vengeance. Let's begin with season 2. After attacking Canute, he forced Thorfinn into slavery. Ketil purchased him. Thorfinn met Einar, another slave, on Ketil's farm. Einar helped Thorfinn rediscover a desire to live again. Thorfinn decided to work with Einar to create Finland after they purchased their freedom. Then some crazy stuff happens. Rest in peace, Arnade. He then reunited with Canute, then eventually purchased his freedom following Ketil's plan. Thorfinn returned home with Leif and Einar and reunited with his family. Now to the manga. Settling in Vinland was going to be expensive, so Thorfinn asked Halfdan for help and he gives him narwhal whale tusks to sell, but they'll have to travel to Greece to sell it to get the highest price. We also meet Gudrid, who would rather be a sailor than marry Sigurd, but she still agrees to go along with the wedding, where she stabbed Sigurd and ran off with Thorfinn's crew as they head out to Greece. On the way, they adopt a dog and a baby from a sacked village. Then at the Norway west coast of the Scandinavian peninsula, they run into Hild. Just like Thorfinn, she seeked revenge for her father's killer, which turned out to be Thorfinn. Eventually, Hild spared him for the same reason that Thorfinn became a pacifist, because her father also shared a similar philosophy of not hating others. But she doesn't forgive Thorfinn and will kill him if he slips up. Thorfinn's quest takes him to Yellings, Denmark, the beginning of the Baltic War arc. Essentially, there's a civil war brewing in the young Vikings to determine the new leader. Floki can't rule anymore at age 50 because he's now too old and his grandson is too young. Thanks to Gudrid, Thorfinn reunited with Thorkel and meets Floki, but doesn't know the truth yet, much like Lelouch's experience with V2. During their encounter, Thorfinn rejects Thorkel's idea to lead the young Vikings and leaves with his crew in a hurry since he figured Floki would come after them, which is what happens. Thorfinn's crew then splits up. He ends up meeting Vagn with Hild, while the rest of the crew waits at a town called Odense. Vagn doesn't want Floki or his grandson to rule because he knows that Floki is responsible for Thor's death. He tells Thorfinn this witness then proves it from testimony from one of Askeladd's former men. This guy also recognized Thorfinn. Despite becoming a pacifist, Thorfinn nearly loses it after learning the truth. Then Garm and Thorkel attack Vang's fortress while Thorfinn and Hild help some slave girls escape the area. Garm killed Vang, then fights Thorfinn. This ends in a draw with Thorfinn running away. In frustration, Garm then captures Thorfinn's crew at Odense to force his rematch. Thorfinn learned about this later on from Bug Eyes and heads off to the fortress. At the fortress, Leif and Einar escape through a secret passage. Unfortunately, Gudrid could not. Also, Thorkel is now working against Floki, fighting alongside Vang's men and Canut's right-hand man, Wolf, as they attack the fortress. Thorfinn arrived, talks to Thorkel and Sigurd, who's fighting here as well. To rescue Gudrid, Thorfinn traveled with Hild through that secret entrance that Einar and Leif used earlier. With the help of one of Baldur's servants, he finds Gudrid, but then Floki enters the same house and Thorfinn loses it. He drew his sword with intensity, slicing Floki's fingers, and thanks to Baldur, doesn't kill Floki, instead choosing to break his sword, regaining his composure. Eventually, Thorkel's men defeat Floki's, and Thorfinn does become the head of the young Vikings. He enacts 3 decrees. The first is to spare Floki and his grandson, the second is to destroy the fortress, and the third is to disband the young Vikings. After this, his crew travel the rest of the way to Greece with seemingly no issues, sold the narwhal tusk, and Thorfinn and Gudrid got married. They have an official ceremony upon returning to Iceland, and I guess Gudrid converted to Christianity along the way. I don't know. So now Thorfinn can fulfill his dream of creating Vinland. Now that we've gone over both characters' quest for vengeance, let's analyze them to determine which one was better. It's interesting that both characters lost their parents as part of a grand conspiracy, although Martin obviously was more impactful to the story, whereas Floki's actions don't come up again until the Baltic War arc. Then there's the similar way in which both Askeladd and Charles manipulated Thorfinn and Lelouch. Askeladd supported Thorfinn's desire for revenge and used it against him. He would send him off into dangerous missions with a duel as the reward. Charles used Lelouch as a possible replacement for C2 or to lure her out to complete the Ragnarok connection. Lelouch realized that everything he did was just a joke to Charles, just another pawn on a larger chessboard. Although of the two, Askeladd showed more genuine concern over Thorfinn as a father figure, especially when compared to Charles. There's also this dichotomy between Lelouch and Thorfinn's upbringing that factored or didn't factor into their quest for vengeance. Despite what Thors told Thorfinn about what makes a true warrior and his philosophy about war itself, Thorfinn still sought vengeance, although did think about his father during that time, so clearly he was in conflict during that event. And Lelouch sought to destroy his father, even though he was sick of everyone scheming to take over the throne. Now, granted, destroying Britannia and killing his father are different goals from taking over Britannia itself, but there is overlap, since Lelouch did go after his siblings and obviously would have to go after the Emperor of Britannia to complete his goals, which is something you would also do if you did want to take over the throne. Basically, both characters were willing to sacrifice their core beliefs in their quest for vengeance, at least initially. Originally, this script only took into account the Vinland Saga anime. In that draft, I mentioned that even if Thorfinn killed Askeladd, it would not have been true vengeance since Floki hired Askeladd in the first place. I mentioned that it seemed like the story just moved on from Floki's involvement and Thorfinn never learned the truth. Thankfully, I learned that this wasn't the case and redrafted the script, so I won't count this against Thorfinn. But it is important to recognize that Thorfinn never even considered why Askeladd ambushed his father in the first place. I don't fault him for not remembering that Thors asked Askeladd if Floki was responsible for this. Thorfinn was probably too young to remember, or just didn't hear it. Although considering he was next to him, it's still odd he didn't remember, but anyways, I'll let that go. But he doesn't get a pass for never looking into it any further. This even applies to not thinking about it during his days on Catel's farm, or any time prior to being dragged into the young Viking Civil War. I thought his reunion with Canute in Season 2 would have been the perfect time for it to come up, but it didn't. I know that Thorfinn became a pacifist after embracing his father's words, so perhaps he stopped concerning himself over his father's death, since that did lead to the wrong path to begin with. But that doesn't justify why he never asked the question to begin with, because looking into this isn't the same as the physical act of taking revenge. As a child, I can't forgive this, but as an adult who understood Askeladd, he should have realized that a man like that wouldn't go after someone like Thors for no reason. The reason why I bring this up is because Lelouch did speculate on his mother's death. Part of his plan was to determine why it happened and punish those who were responsible. Now, granted, Lelouch only saw the aftermath, and Thorfinn witnessed his father's death firsthand. But the point still stands. One character recognized a possible bigger conspiracy, while the other didn't. So the point goes to Lelouch. Now let's talk about the characters' approaches. The issue for me is that Thorfinn was just a dumb, angry child. He kept losing his duels to Askeladd and never figured out why. Whereas Lelouch did learn from his various defeats and came back stronger each time. He figured out there's more to war than he initially believed. Now, this isn't fair because Thorfinn's situation was much different. For one thing, he didn't have Lelouch's 7-year gap to think about everything before enacting his plans. This poor boy was trained to kill one man immediately after his father's death at age 6. But I'm still annoyed he hadn't considered Askeladd's words after each failed attempt to kill him. I know that Thorfinn's ignorance is intentional, and that's what leads to his character growth in future arcs, but that doesn't spare him from the criticism nonetheless. This is not a shot at the writing, rather just a character flaw, no different than Zaku's stubbornness or Lelouch's overconfidence. So again, the point goes to Lelouch. In terms of actually getting revenge, this one is quite tricky. Lelouch did kill V2, but didn't know the truth at that time. So does that count? Well, in my opinion, not really. Lelouch didn't even realize what he did after learning the truth in turn 21, almost as if he forgot about it. And while Canute did kill Askeladd, Thorfinn did encounter Floki uninterrupted. Floki was the one actually responsible for Thor's death, so he was able to confront the person with the knowledge of their transgression. Thorfinn spared Floki, but did cut him a bit, whereas Lelouch uses Gias to kill his father during their first encounter, which he admitted was a rash mistake since there were unanswered questions. Lelouch also went off on his parents while in C's world when learning the truth. When it came down to it, Lelouch couldn't control his rage while Thorfinn could. Thorfinn forgave Floki, whereas Lelouch couldn't forgive his parents, and I think that Thor's death hurt Thorfinn more than Marian's did to Lelouch. So it showed that Thors was much stronger than Lelouch in this situation. And this is a fair comparison since Lelouch and Thorfinn both learned the truth last minute, so neither had time to think things through. Although you could argue that the Zero Requiem definitely showed Lelouch's growth, which I'm not denying. All I'm saying is when it came to his parents, Lelouch couldn't forgive them and directly or indirectly destroyed them. It's true that Marion and Charles were going to destroy everything with the Ragnarok connection, so Lelouch had to stop them. But what I'm referring to is how Lelouch accomplished this. He rejected them, expressed his frustration for their contradictory actions, and told them to be gone. I assume C's world responded to his hatred, which is why Charles and Marion were consumed, or maybe it was because their plan rejected humanity's desire, and so C's world absorbed them. Take your pick. The point is, when Lelouch learned everything, he couldn't let it go, and the rest is history. I also speculate that Charles may not have held on to his mind in C's world if Lelouch forgave his parents before they were absorbed. By comparison, Thorfinn spared Floki's life while conquering his hatred. He had become the warrior that Thors described as one who doesn't need a sword, as the famous line from Schindler's List goes.
Power is when we have every justification to kill, and we don't.
Now, Floki doesn't get off the hook here. Sure, Thorfinn spared him, but now he has to live the rest of his life with this shame, since Floki hated Thor's attitude and his son defeated him with the same one. The man is clearly messed up on the ship as he traveled with his grandson, and as Jafar once said,
"There are things so much worse than death."
Now when it comes to comparing creating Vinland versus the Zero Requiem, it's hard for me to decide which was better since the Vinland Saga hasn't ended, but they are both examples of the characters moving past their quest of vengeance and working towards a brighter future. So when taking all these things into consideration, despite Lelouch's smarter approach, at the end of the day, only one of these characters perfectly avenged their parents. When it mattered most, only one of these characters acted better under pressure. That would be the son of Thors, Thorfinn, who despite honoring his father's wisdom, still avenged him in the most respectful way possible. So therefore his quest for vengeance was better than Lelouch's. But honestly, the story of both are master classes of awesome character storytelling, and even though I favored Thorfinn's over Lelouch, that doesn't mean Lelouch's quest was bad, because it wasn't. It was amazing. This is like picking your favorite child. It was hard to come to a verdict, but that's the one that I came up with. If you liked the video, don't forget to subscribe and let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Expect more Vinland Saga videos coming down the pipeline, and until then, I will see you in the next video.